And we are going to be presenting on Qualtrics. That is the company that we decided to interview. We actually got a tour of Qualtrics. And so to just give a kind of brief introduction to Qualtrics, some of the things that are just foundational. It was formed in 2002 by Scott Smith, Jared Smith brothers, and then Stuart Orgio. It was acquired in 2018 by SAP for $8 billion. In January 28th of 2021, Qualtrics went public as well. Ryan Smith's net worth is close to $1.5 billion right now at this point. And just a couple interesting things that we learned. We were able to interview Maggie Olson. She's the head of customer success and recruiting at Qualtrics. And back in 2019, prior to COVID, Qualtrics had 1,700 employees, and at the current moment, they're now well over 5,000 employees. So just a little bit more about Qualtrics. The office used to be, prior to Qualtrics, an MLM company. There was a waterfall when we first walked in, when the MLM company owned it, and they turned it into a basketball court. So that's the first thing that you see when you walk into the Qualtrics building, is just this cool basketball court. Ryan Smith is the owner of the Jazz, and he had been for a year or two now. And so we all thought that was really cool, kind of unique. Not very often do you walk into a office and a massive corporation and there's a basketball court, the first thing that you see. Just a couple other things about Qualtrics too. The garden area in the back, they have this massive garden area, and it actually used to be a wedding venue, and now it's a place for people to kind of go and just de-stress, detox, kind of get a place away that's just kind of a totally different environment from like the workspace. And to kind of tie into that, some of the things that Qualtrics has done is each level of the main corporate office has a theme. And so the first theme on the first floor is water, and there's these murals that they have, and there was one that we walked by that was recently painted and finished by the time that we had the tour of this water mural. And then the second level is land, and then the third is space. And so a lot of these things really tie into the culture of Qualtrics. So I guess, Jake, when we first walked in, what were some of those things that you first saw with the pillars?
Yeah, so it was actually really cool. On each of the pillars around the basketball court, they had an acronym spelled out TACOS. And though we all love tacos, and sometimes we found Ryan Smith himself handing out and making tacos for the rest of the employees, they actually stand for transparent, all-in, customer-obsessed, one team, and scrappy. And each of these 5 things really define who the company is and who the employees are that work for them. They are very transparent. When you walk around the different offices, it's very open. No one has individual offices. They're all, and any conference room is all this glass. All in and customer obsessed. That's really pushing them to put in their all for the customers. They always talk about them. They always focus on them. But on the other side, they are one team. They work together. That's part of the open office feel. Is you can walk around, you can see the CEO there and just walk up and work with him, talk with him, or any of the other departments. But they don't forget to be scrappy. That's kind of going back to their roots of being a startup feel, is they're always looking to be scrappy, kind of finding the next thing, just making by with what they have. And I think it really ties into, there's this thing called the competing values framework. It was created by Robert Quinn, and there's 2 different axes on it. There's one that talks about how flexible to stable the company is, and the other is on internally focused versus externally focused. And after talking with them, we definitely feel that it's definitely flexible. It's always looking for being flexible with the employees. But I feel like there's a lot of arguments that can be made between internally focused and externally focused. What do you guys think about, touring it? What did you guys feel?
Yeah, it's honestly a good question. I feel like it really depends on the department that we would speak to in a lot of ways, right? Because some I would argue are even more internal and some are more external. But overall vibes, I feel that Qualtrics does a really good job of like I'd make the argument that because they're so scrappy, and I feel like we heard that word like 10 billion times while we were over there, like that just seems like a true pillar that they follow. It makes me think more adhocracy in terms of like being entrepreneurial and risk taking. And I feel like the impression I got walking into the office was this is like a startup that has a lot of money. And I think even Ian Miller, who we also interviewed or spoke to for a minute, and he's the customer success manager principal of global strategic accounts. He was talking about that as well, that it's kind of like the startup feeling, but with the bank account and the resources of a big company. So sometimes in that way, I feel like I'd lean a little bit more adhocracy, but there's definitely both.
I'd have to agree with that. I remember Maggie, who gave us a tour, was a former Goldman Sachs employee, and she was saying how at Goldman Sachs, when an employee wanted to discuss compensation, there'd be an entire department of employees to discuss and negotiate compensation, whereas at Qualtrics, that's just something that they give to any HR employee to handle. And so, just like you said, we talked about this idea of scrappiness and how they value being an $18 billion market cap tech company, but with an entrepreneurial startup mindset still.
Yeah, so I guess Dave, my next question, going in from the one team part of tacos, how does the hiring process kind of work at Qualtrics? What did that kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a hiring process I feel like is pretty unique. It's pretty intense hiring process too. So this is where they keep their culture. It's so important to them that they actually have about 7 to 9 interviews for each position, depending on where it is. And they're not easy interviews. They're each like between 30 to 40 minutes. And some of the interviews will be pretty early on about tacos, just seeing if they're a good fit for this company, if they fit those 5 different values, along with the typical case interviews like a normal company would have. But it really allows them to see with these 7 to 9 interviews with all these different people, where if they don't fit the culture, they're not going to hire the person. They want to make sure that who they hire really works with the company and can help propel them forward into the future.
Yeah, awesome. So I guess moving on, Derek, for you, I guess what were some of the things that made Qualtrics unique? Obviously, they're a huge company. They've done really well. They're super successful. And it's cool to come be a company that's come and grown out of Utah. But what are a couple of the things that I guess makes Qualtrics unique from some of these other tech companies?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned earlier, just when you walk in, the first thing you see is just a basketball court in the lobby. That's something that I found really unique. I've never seen a big company like $19 billion market cap that just has a basketball court as their lobby. I thought that was pretty unique and cool. But I think what makes them really successful is just that the environment is something that is, I guess I would say the environment is something that is comfortable for everybody. I read something from the Wall Street Journal where Zig Serafin, the CEO, said that creating the right environment will increase your productivity, effectiveness, and even your motivation. It will result in improved results. And so I think we saw this just with like the office layout, every floor had a different theme, which I think builds a lot of team unity. And then there's tons of different foods and drinks, which is really nice when you're grinding in the office all day. Just makes people more comfortable. And then, going even further, the bubble chairs and massage chairs for more of an informal setting, I think was really great. And then lastly, I think they talked about so many family events they do and funded team activities, which builds a lot of unity. I think makes it a really comfortable environment to be a part of. And I think, their employee turnover rate definitely speaks to their success. They said that their turnover rate is only 3%, which I think just is proof of a very successful culture.
Yeah, compared to the industry, that's super low. So, we've talked a lot about Qualtrics. We've talked a lot about just kind of our experience. Honestly, we had a really good time there. It was really cool. At the end, we even got drinks. Got myself a little Red Bull drink, just like you would at Fizz or Swig or something like that. But we did ask Maggie, just kind of like, what are the weaknesses? Where does Qualtrics kind of have some gaps? What's next? What can we fix? So I guess, David, what are some of the suggestions that we had? Some of the just overall, feelings and things that we get, learned from the tour.
Totally. That's a great question. Honestly, I feel like Qualtrics has done a really good job, and I was excited to hear what Maggie had to say about what she felt like could be improved, especially as someone who has some influence in terms of recruiting stuff. And I also just wanted to throw in, if it's okay, going back a little bit to what Derek was talking about, something that came to mind for me is also the fact that like, I think Zig does a really good job as the CEO, and the fact that we saw where his office was and its glass and everything, and that was mentioned before too. But they do those things like the TGIT, the Thank Goodness It's Thursday, where it's like a company-wide meeting every time. They also have those OKRs, like the reviews, where Zig has like access to every team's like key indicators and the types of things they're working on, and they don't judge them on how they hit their indicators, but the fact that they have them and how many they're tracking. I just thought that was really cool because as you said that, it reminded me about that the fact that like the culture is very much owned across the board. There's a lot of transparency, and even though there's a lot of employees and a decent amount of hierarchy, it doesn't feel like that because the CEO is really down to earth.
The other thing to mention too, real quick, with that was the executive office is right in the main center portion of the building. You walk in, you got the court, but then you got this glass box that's basically just floating in the middle of the office, and that's where a lot of the executives will have their big meetings. So I think that just kind of goes to that point of transparency.
Totally. And even if they have like big execs from their clients coming in, that's where they'll still meet and people just see them. That's really cool. So I'd say in terms of recommendations, there are two main areas that I think, one comes from our observations, I would say, and then one to what you're asking about, Isaac, mostly about what Maggie had mentioned. And so what Maggie had talked about was the fact that she wishes there was more like collaboration and team effectiveness given COVID and like this virtual model right now. And that's kind of hard to escape. I personally felt, and I'm sure you guys would agree, that Qualtrics has actually done quite a few things that are much better than some of the other businesses I've worked with. However, no doubt there's still like a gap there. They have like a unique situation that I think requires them to handle it differently because they're growing so fast. And also they're really pushing for, like they've said, they don't want to be a remote company. And so they keep setting dates where like, we're going to be back in office. When they hire people, they require them to move, or like with the expectation that they'll move once they're back in person and all that kind of stuff. So that makes it like challenging, right? Because you're on a team now with a bunch of people who've all been there less than a year and you don't really know each other. And they do some things that I thought were really cool, like the one screen, one face idea, that even if they are in person, like members of the team are in person, they will all be on the Zoom call individually, so that it's not like a group call, so that people who are remote feel like more personal. We also mentioned before, like they can do events now periodically and get funding for it, and that's really good. But I do think that in order to, like to Maggie's point, that the employees are feeling it, like it's tough. And so part of me thinks that they can do a little bit more to push like the in-person or social collaborative type of events, especially as we ride out into COVID. But also like looking forward to the future, I think that's like an important obstacle to face, is now there's a lot more international offices and teams are becoming more widespread, that they need to start thinking about ways that they can get people together, like things like retreats, and less of the TGITs are cool, like the virtual weekly meetings, but if they do more stuff in person, like some of the other tech companies in Utah, for example, who aren't quite as big, but do a lot more face-to-face stuff. In terms of the second recommendation, and just to kind of close this out, something that I know we all talked about and noticed was the fact that like right now their HR team or their HR function is really two individual teams, one for compensation and one for recruiting, which makes like for an interesting dynamic, especially because they kind of have competing values in some ways. And I've heard from talking to our interviews and stuff like that, and talking to my wife, that part of the issue is, the compensation team wants to be pushing, like keeping salary ranges, compensation low, whereas the recruiting team wants them up. And this poses an issue too when you don't have like an overarching group. For example, Maggie's team, which just decreased from 4 to 3 people, there's just 3 of them, and their quota for next year for the number of people they think they need to hire in the CS or the customer success department is 125, I think. It's like, how are 3 people going to hire 125 people? Especially when you think about the fact that like the interview process, like Jake said, is really rigorous. In fact, like they're notoriously, they have like after interviewers will give them like a definite no, maybe, yes, hard yes. And even people who get a lot of yeses or hard yeses will still be rejected by the hiring manager sometimes because they don't feel like they're quite like elite enough to be the perfect fit for Qualtrics. And it's tough because you can't be that picky, but also need that many people in your growth strategy. So I would say like one of the recommendations we talked about was like having more of an overarching team who helps to guide that process a little bit better. I think that would be really valuable to kind of have like an HR function that manages the competing like motivations behind each of the teams.
Cool. Well, thank you for tuning in to the HRM podcast.